Welcome back to part 2 of the infamous serial killers from each state. We talked about A through L in the first video. To this video, we're going to be talking about M through W. Um, if you're new here, hit that like button, subscribe, ring that bell for notifications, and comment a serial killer from your state you bet a lot of people don't know about. So, we're going to start with our M states. And this includes, I'm going to see if I can name them off memory. Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, uh, Mississippi, Missouri, and Montana. We have a lot of M states too compared to I states. I don't know why, but I did mostly good. I'm trying to remember them. But Maine, we have John Jubert. No, Jew. They have a weird J rule. I can't think of it how that J rule goes. Um, Jubert was once I'm gonna say John because I don't want to butcher his last name up. John once said that he was young. When he was young, he fantasized about killing his babysitter and eating her. In the 70s, um, he made his fantasies a reality when he killed three boys, strangling them and taking bites into each. Ew. Two of the kills took place in Nebraska when he was working in the Air Force. The third happened in Maine when he abducted an 11-year-old boy who was out for a jog. So when John was caught, he was happy because he knew he would kill again, according to the New York Daily. He met his fate with the electric chair 27 years ago, almost on my birthday, July 17, 1996. Next, we have Maryland. And that is Joseph Metheny. In the 90s, Metheny would lure sex workers to his trailer and stab and strangle them. But what he did with their bodies really shocked the nation. Turns out Metheny also owned a food stand where he would eat a mix of human flesh from his victims, well, with him and his customers. The video on cannibalistic serial killers, and none of them got to me like that one did. Um, to him, the human body taste was very similar to pork. If you mix it together, no one can tell the difference. To know his name, the cannibal, he was found guilty on 3 murder charges and was facing the death penalty, but in 2000 it was overturned into a life sentence. He died in prison. Massachusetts. Between 1962 and 1964, Boston was plagued with a serial killer. 13 women were killed in their homes, and there was no sign of forced entry. So police believe each victim led the murder involuntarily. Despite the fact that some of the women were stabbed to death, the killer earned the name the Boston Strangler. His killing sparked a full panic in the small city. Albert DeSalvo confessed to all 13 killings, but his story didn't fully add up. He was eventually murdered in prison where he needed to be. In the case of the Boston Strangler serial killer is still left unsolved. Michigan, Elias. I actually like that name, Elias. I'm going to try to attempt to pronounce this last name, guys, but I'm not going to say his last name for the remainder of the video. Abulazam. He was known as the serial stabber. Between 2009 and 10, Elias stabbed 18 people in Flint, Michigan. Of those 18, 5 people were killed. His stabbings became national news and would cross state lines with even more people. Some believe his stabbings were racially motivated, because the majority of his victims were African American. He was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes and remains in prison. Minnesota. There's the Minnesota Vikings. Is it Minnesota Vikings? Please don't hate me in the comments if I please don't hate me on that one. But we have Paul Michael Stefani. In 1982, Minnesota police received several phone calls from a man who was crying. He would call every time he killed a person confessing to a murder. In the years to come, the Weepy Voice Killer, I actually like that name, that's kind of funny, would be identified as Paul Michael Stefani. Stefani admitted after beating and stabbing 3 women between the years 1980 and 1982, where he confessed to several other murders, just before dying in prison, according to the Star Tribune. Now, Mississippi. We have Glenn Rogers. In 1995, Rogers met Linda Price at the Mississippi State Fair, and they shared a drink. That's how all great love stories start, isn't it? Eventually, they moved in together. The day before Halloween, a redhead was found dead in the bathtub, and Rogers fled the scene. Later, Rogers was connected to 2 murders of the women with red hair and found slain in bathtubs. Rogers became known as the cross-country killer for killing his victims across multiple state lines. In 2012, reports surfaced that Rogers may be the murderer of Nicole Simpson. Not O.J. Simpson, but nothing came of it. Interesting. Me stroking my imaginary beard. He was convicted of 2 murders and sentenced to death. Roger is currently on death row. Next we have Missouri, Terry Flair. Flair first killed his pregnant girlfriend and the mother of his 2 children in 1982. Since then, he has raped and killed at least 7 other women during his time in Kansas City, Missouri. While on trial for his murders, he was described as being a cold, calculating killer determined to kill as many as women who worked as sex workers. He was found guilty of 8 charges of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Terry is not the only members of the Blair family who has a murderous past. 5 other relatives, including his mother, who was convicted of murder. So that makes the Blair family, one of the most murderous families in Missouri. So it's a family business. I see. And lastly of our M states, we have Montana. I've actually just recently started watching Yellowstone, so after seeing clips of it, but I'm trying to get started into the series, start watching the series. So no spoilers on that, please. I do love Beth Dutton, I love her comebacks of all. And Rip's not so bad, but anyway. In Montana, we have David Meyerhofer. For the rest of the video, we're going to say David for this, okay? In 1973, a 7-year-old girl in Michigan was abducted and strangled to death. Her killer cut her body. The murder turned out to be David, who confessed to 4 other murders during a 4-hour interrogation, and they called him the mindless monster. He was also one of the first serial killers to be identified using the FBI's newly developed profiling system, which helped countless other serial killers. He hanged himself in jail hours after confessing. We're going to start off with 2 of our end states before we start our new states. So, in Nebraska, we have Charles Starkweather. Technically, Starkweather is a spree killer, but that doesn't make it any less terrifying. In 1958, for 2 short months, Starkweather shocked the nation with his crimes. At just 19 years old, he's killed 11 people. Guys, at 19, I was starting college. Yes, I took a year off after I graduated, and yes, I went to college. But anyway, he scared everyone because he was killing. His killing was reckless abandon at random. There was no pattern or no clear idea who would be next. He told authorities that he started his killing spree because his parents did not approve of his girlfriend, according to a Wyoming history website. Starkweather was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death in 19 sentenced to death. He was executed in 1959. Nevada. The only thing I know about Nevada is Reno and Las Vegas. From what I've been told, it's a desert state, and I do know that running away is actually legal in Nevada. Um, so in Nevada we have Gerald and Charlene Gallego. They had a deal. Charlene would kidnap the girls and lure them to a false promise of safety. Gerald would keep them for sex slaves, killing them when he was finished. By 1980, the couple killed 10 teenagers in Nevada and California. They were both given the name Sex Slaves Killer. So, once caught, Charlene told Gerald in return of a short sentence, turned on Gerald in return of a short sentence. So Gerald was found and was sentenced to death in both California and Nevada, but he died of cancer before he could be executed. Charlene got out of jail in 2013 after serving a 16-year sentence. That's just very scary on that one because she could do it again. She could find someone to easily manipulate and do it again. Now we're going to start with our new states before we start with our North states. So with our new states, we're going to start with New Hampshire with Terry Peter Robinson. And I think it's pretty understandable if I say Terry for the rest of this video on that. Um, it's hard to pin down Terry. They called him Charlemagne Camelon because he went on by so many names and aliases. In New Hampshire, he was known as Bob Evans, who killed one woman and her 3 children. He stuffed their bodies in barrels in the wood. In California, he was known as Gordon Jensen, where he killed 2 other women who were mothers of babies. Must didn't like moms and children. I don't know why. Okay. His body count rose across state lines, and after the list of his alias grew. He was finally identified, but he had already died in prison, where he was serving time for a different charge in 2010. In New Jersey, we have Charles Edmund Cullen. Anybody else getting Twilight vibes over here, or is it just me? Okay. Cullen was the Angel of Death killer. He killed upward of 40 people over his 16-year career as a nurse in New Jersey. So when patients would look to him to care during their darkest times, he would respond by killing them, usually with prescription drugs. In his confession, Cullen said he believed that he was doing a community a service, helping these 6 patients relieve their pain during his 60 minutes interview. He apologized for his crimes and said, "I didn't know if I would have stopped." Cullen only confessed to 30 murders, but investigators and experts believed his body count might reach the hundreds. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 11 life sentences. We have New Mexico. We have a lot of in-states, I noticed that too. With David Parker Ray. Ray brought a $100,000 trailer. Inside that trailer, he had a personal torture chamber. This chamber has sex toys, handcuffs, whips, and chains. And this would bring his victims to the chamber to torture him sexually before murdering them. He would get dubbed as the Toy Box Killer, because he would often record these. And what sick person does that? Really, what sick person does that? He will let women go after torturing them. For others, he will cut them into. Sometimes he will let women go after torturing them. For others, he will cut them into pieces. He was sentenced to 224 years in prison. Next on our list, we have New York, the last of our new states. And this is Joel Rifkin, who was sentenced pulled over by police with a license plate When it suddenly attacked, the smell escaped his trunk. The smell turned out to be Tiffany Boscani in her body. It was discovered over 4 years the Long Islander killed 17 women, most of them were sex workers. I'm noticing a pattern here. He dismembered the bodies and disposed of them in New York. He was found guilty of killing 17 women, and he was sentenced to 203 years in prison, which he is still serving. In an interview he did with Daily News in 2010, Rifkin said, "I'm surprised I didn't get caught." Now we're going to talk about our North states, Carolina and Dakota. We're going to start in North Carolina first, with Henry Louis Wallace. When 10 women were murdered in the mid-90s in Charlotte, North Carolina, they all had one thing in common. They all knew Henry Louis Wallace. This would be Q and Criminal Minds coming in at this point? No? Okay. Each of the women were friends with Wallace's girlfriend or worked with him. And each had his name in their phone books. Wallace even attended their funerals. Yep. Cueing the BAU at this point. Please do it. During this confession, he explained he strangled each of his victims and disposed their bodies in lakes and near the railroad tracks. He is currently on death row waiting to fulfill a death sentence. And last of our North states, Dakota. One of the states that shares the border with Canada. So, Eugene Butler was declared mentally insane in 1906 and died in an asylum a few years later. So 2 years after his death, a small town in North Dakota learned Butler may have been a serial killer. While excavating his former home, they found the bodies of 6 boys and young men buried under the floorboards. They were between the ages of 15 and 16. They were killed to a blow in the back of the head. The motive for the murders was never discovered. Now, we're going to talk about our O states, Ohio, Oklahoma, and Oregon. You notice we're getting close, guys. And then we'll figure out what I'm going to do next. And that is, we're going to start with Ohio with Sean Crate. In 2016, police received a 911 call outside Columbus, Ohio. The woman called saying she had been kidnapped. When police arrived at the home, the place was filled with garbage to the ceiling. The smell of decay was overwhelming. Police found a strangled woman hiding under a pile of clothes. Second victim of decomposing body in the basement, Sean was taken into handcuffs and later confessed to killing 5 women. And she was found guilty and sentenced to death in 2018. In Oklahoma, we have Nanny Doss. I really hope this is her actual name. If not, this is going to be a grandma for sure. Okay. So, despite killing 11 of her own family members, what? Nanny Doss never broke a smile and was nicknamed the Giggly Granny. Oh my goodness. Someone's grandma actually did this? Oh wow. Some papers even described her as more of a cartoon character than a serial killer. So by the time she stopped her brutal reign over her family in the late 50s, she had murdered 4 of her husbands, 1 of her mother-in-laws, 2 her 2 sisters, her grandson, her nephew, 2 of her own children, and even her own mother. How did she not get the death penalty on this? I have no clue. So with some poison, she killed every one of her family members she disagreed with. Never disagree with Nanny. She was sentenced to life in prison in 1965. Next we have Oregon, which is Randall Woodfield. In 1974, Woodfield was drafted into the NFL to play for the Green Bay Packers. What the NFL didn't know, they had just drafted America's deadliest serial killer. But the Green Bay Packers are more careful who they draft now, huh? So, Woodfield didn't know he would become a well-known football player. Instead, he was known as the I-5 killer, which overranked that. Killing over 40 people on the interstate in Oregon and in the 80s. He would rob, rape, and kill his victims. He preferred this method, having his victims lay down and shooting them in the back of the head. He is now currently serving a life sentence. So now we're going to do our PR states. There's only one P state and one R state in the country. So we're going to start with Pennsylvania with Harvey Robertson. Robertson is known for being one of the youngest serial killers reported in the U.S. At just 17, he was attacked and raped 5 women, killing them all. At 17, I was rolling to run away from home, but here we are now. Um, in some cases, he would break into their victim's home. One of more brutal cases when he broke into a 5-year-old girl's home, raped and strangled her. He survived the attack. Robertson was sentenced to death and remains on death row. Next, we have Rhode Island, a very tiny state. And now that tiny state comes Craig Price. So, although Robertson is known for being a young serial killer, Price from Rhode Island was even younger. According to the Boston Globe, it is best that he said at best he stabbed 4 of his neighbors to death in their home before he was old enough to drive. So in 1987, when he turned 13, he stabbed Rebecca Spencer to death. 2 years later, he killed Joan Heaton and her 2 daughters. Price is currently serving in jail after confessing to the brutal murders. Since he was a minor at the time, he would not have been sentenced for those crimes. Well, since we talked about our North states, now we've got to talk about our South states, right? So, we're going to start with our South state, South Carolina, with Donald Henry Gaskins. So, they called him Donald Henry Gaskins Pee Wee. It was a silly name for a sadistic man who took pleasure in torturing women sexually. In fact, he has claimed to killed over 200 hitchhikers. First, he would abduct them, and then he would torture them. He broke their bones, bit them, ew, and then sometimes acted as with his own cannibalistic instincts. He was put to death in 1991. So before his execution, he even penned an autobiography called Final Truth, the autobiography of a serial killer. Guys, if you know what's in my mind, I've got to find that book now because I just want to get inside the mind of one just to see what's going on. Like, why? Why do we kill? That's what I want to know. Um, in the book, he, um, he calls his need as his botheromeness. In the 92 book he wrote, the botheromeness was getting worse. It was making me ache all over the body, my back, all the way down to my groin. So the mere sight of a woman enraged these feelings, making them pulsate and cringe in the pit of my stomach. I want to know why he hates women now, because that's just interesting. So in South Dakota we have Robert Leroy Anderson. In 1994, Amy Anderson was the only woman to escape the clutches of Robert Leroy Anderson. I wonder if there's any relation. Well, no, I keep reading to find out. Um, After pushing her car off the road, he grabbed her and pulled her into a ditch. She fought back and got away. Later, Anderson would be charged with 2 murders: Larissa Deminsky in 94 and Piper Strebel in 96. Although he only killed 2 women, authorities called him a serial killer that would have killed again if he had not stopped. He was sentenced to death. He appealed in the South Dakota Supreme Court and heard arguments. 4 days later, the photo was taken. Anderson took his life in prison. Now we're going to start with our T states. And this is, we're going to start with Paul Dennis Reed. So, in the 90s, Reed moved to Nashville to become a country music star. Okay, there was Manson. Now there's Reed. Seriously, what is going on here? Anyway, he struggled to make his way into the country music scene, but he took a job as a dishwasher at a local fast food restaurant. But he was fired one night in 1994 for apparently setting down set for to a murderous path. From there, Reed went on to rob 4 different fast food restaurants to kill people inside. In all, he murdered 7 people, becoming known as the fast food killer. He was sentenced to death but died from pneumonia in prison to 2013. Seriously? There was Manson. Now there's Reed. Come on now. So should we call him the country music version of Charles Manson? I don't know. I don't know if he's led a cult or not. Y'all let me know in the comments if you know anything about that case. We have Texas now. We have Dean Curl. I think I talked about this the last video. But he's the reason your parents probably told you never take candy from strangers. He was the stranger who would lure children and teenagers to his van with false promises of candy. In fact, he was known as the Candy Man. Man, that name can be dubbed so many different ways. We're gonna go with the serial killer way, but anyway, by 73, he had killed 28 boys in Texas, just outside of Houston. I was just in Houston. He also recruited 2 teenagers as accomplices to help him. He got away with the murders for almost 30 years because no one suspected him. He was a straight-laced man who worked at his mother's candy factory. I'm trying so hard here, guys. But one of his accomplices, Wayne Henley, owned him and shot him to death. Henley confessed and told the police all about the work with Kroll. He and his other accomplices are now serving life sentences in prison. Next, we're going to be talking about our UV states, which is Utah, Vermont, and Virginia. Fun fact about this next one, he assisted in helping with Gary Ridgway, and his name is actually still on the Mormon wall to this day. I can't remember the name now. It saved my life. But anyway, if your guess Ted Bundy, you would be correct. So he is perhaps the most recognizable serial killers on this list. Although he had women all over the country, Bundy made his way through Utah in 74 and when he was attending law school at the University of Utah. And at the time, he tricked women with his clean, preppy looks. That's how they get you, ladies. He would often lure them by faking an injury. He would then rape and murder them. In Utah, he murdered 3 women. He was sentenced to 15 years in Utah State Prison, but was extradited to Colorado. He was sentenced to death and met the electric chair in 1989. And there is a theory that the person who electrocuted him was a woman. That just made me strangely very happy. Okay, so we're going to start with our V states with Israel Keyes. So when Keyes killed himself in prison in 2012, he took a lot of answers with him. This much for certain, he killed 2 sex workers between 2001 and 2005. But investigators believe the serial killer had at least 11 people in the country. Authorities also link him to murders in Burlington, Vermont in 2011. Bill and Lorraine Courier were asleep in their homes when Keyes broke in and caused a blitz attack, waking them up from their sleep. Dragging them to their car, he brought them to an abandoned house and shot Bill to death. After Lorraine attempted to escape, he sexually assaulted her and strangled her to death. In Virginia, we have Timothy Wilson Spencer. No one knew for years who killed 4 women in southern Virginia. They only knew the suspect of the Southside Strangler. In each of the murders, he broke into their homes, raped and sodomized them, and strangled them with a belt or a rope. DNA testing confirmed years later that Timothy Wilson Spencer was the Southside Strangler. He was found guilty of raping and killing 4 women and was put to death in 1994. Now we have covered almost all the 50 states but our W states, which include West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. So we're going to start with Washington. I forgot that one. Say that one earlier. Anyway, in Washington, I said his name earlier, which Ted Bundy assisted in helping with, was Gary Ridgway. The Green River Killer in Washington state became the notorious of them number of bodies that were found during the 90s. Discovery of the corpses led to another newsflash, the area of a serial killer that was nicknamed the Green River Killer. DNA tests found out Ridgway was the murderer, and he was confirmed, in fact, to be confessing to over 75 murders. Ridgway said he would kidnap runaways and sex workers along Route 99 and take them to his home. Once there, he would strangle them to death and dispose of their bodies in a great wooded area. He was charged with 38 murders, and he was able to avoid the death sentence with a plea bargain. He is still living out his life sentence. West Virginia, Harry F. Powers. So, in 1927, the American Friendship Society acted as a matchmaking business. You pay an annual fee and you receive a list of eligible lovers in your area. Sounds legit, right? Well, Powers brought a subscription listed as an alias. The women who met him on his date disappeared, so by 1932 he killed and robbed 5 people, according to the New York Daily News. He was called the Lonely Hearts Murderer. He was sentenced to death and hung in 1932. In Wisconsin, this one should be no surprise, Ed Gein. Gein seemed to be the character of a horror movie which makes sense because Psycho's Norman Bates and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre are actually based off of him. So when police came to his house and they found his body parts all over, in fact, some of the furnishings were killed in body parts, and he is even said to have worn a mask made from skin from one of his victims. That's just gross. So he was found guilty for one of the murders and was sent to a mental institution. He died of cancer in 1984. Lastly on our list we have Wyoming. So, in Wyoming we have Polly Bartlett. So, the story of Bartlett dates back to 1868 when she was surrounded by a local lore. The story goes that Bartlett ran in with her family, and she was said to have poisoned the guests with arsenic and would then ditch them in a local corral. Authorities found 22 bodies of the men who the innkeeper had allegedly killed before she could stand trial for the crimes. She was shot to death, reportedly by a friend of one of the victims. She is described as Wyoming's first and worst serial killers. That is it for this. I will see y'all next time. Remember to hit that merch shop. See if please, it's all going for a good cause. Hit that like button, comment, subscribe, ring that bell for notifications. If there is a case that interests you, there is an update on a case, please let me know. I'm always interested to hear updates on cases. And I will see y'all next time.